Kör jag direkt eller?
Back to the third session of the Svemin Environmental Conference, the first digital environmental conference that we host ever. And I'm happy to see you guys back here for this third session of the day. Water is what we are going to talk about now, water management. Water is one of the most important issues in mining and one of the issues the permitting processes focus on, rightly so. It is important. But risk judgments and investigations could be tricky and lengthy. The Water Framework Directive is decisive and does have good intentions, but the implementation or application do cause challenges. This is really complicated matters. Therefore, we are very happy to have with us today someone who can explain this to us. We're looking forward to listen to Johanna Söderasp. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Yes, and good afternoon. We had to solve it. We had a bit of technical issues, but I think I hope this will work. My name is Johanna Söderasp, and I am Water Management Director of the Bothnian Bay Water District Authority. And the Bothnian Bay District is the northernmost water district in Sweden, and my office is located in Luleå in the county of Norrbotten. So I've been asked to give an introduction to this water management session of the Svemin Conference 2020 by explaining the main purpose behind the EU Water Framework Directive and describe the essentials of the water management system it prescribes. So I have chosen the title, The EU Water Framework Directive, a legal frame for adaptive governance of water resources within the EU for this presentation. Next. So we start with some background. And before the Water Framework Directive, the water legislation within the Union was perceived as quite fragmented, sectoral, overlapping and difficult to overview. So basically, water directives had been adopted since the 1970s as reactions to specific problems such as drinking water quality, bathing water quality, protection of groundwaters, and the prevention of water pollution by nitrates from agriculture. Next. So in the 1990s, increasing pressures on Europe's water motivated the EU to a more global approach to water management. And in the year 2000, the EU Water Framework Directive was adopted. So through the VFD, a modern and holistic approach to the management of freshwater resources was introduced, with sustainability and a long-term protection of water resources in focus. So the directive was aimed at facilitating this shift from fragmented and sectoral water policies to a more holistic, integrated and adaptive governance system based on water's natural flow and boundaries. Next. The Water Framework Directive has been described as the most substantial and ambitious piece of EU environmental legislation to date. And this high environmental ambition becomes clear when looking at the recital and purposes of the directive. So in the first recital, for example, the directive states that water is not a commercial product like any other, but rather a heritage which must be protected, defended, and treated as such. The purpose of the directive is described in Article 1 and summarized here as to establish a framework for the protection of surface waters and groundwaters, to prevent further deterioration of surface waters and groundwaters, to promote sustainable water use based on long-term protection of available resources, and to progressively reduce pollution of both groundwaters and surface waters within the Union. Next. Key elements of the Water Framework Directive are the environmental objectives and an adaptive ecosystem-based management system. So the environmental objectives in Article 4 implies two main obligations on the Member States. First, Member States shall prevent further deterioration of the status of all surface and groundwater bodies within the Union. And second, member states shall protect, enhance, and restore all water bodies in order to achieve good water status, originally by the end of 2015. A good water status encompasses the environmental objectives of good ecological and chemical status of surface waters and good quantitative and chemical status of groundwater. And the directive leaves room for alternative objectives for waters that are artificial or heavily modified by human activities. In these cases, member states should aim at achieving good ecological potential and good ecological or good surface water chemical status. So in order to fulfill these environmental objectives, the VFD relies on an ecosystem-based adaptive management system to be carried out repetitively in 6-year cycles. The ecosystem perspective is reflected through the river basin management approach, meaning that the administrative arrangements must be based on water's natural boundaries and flows, hence at hydrological rather than administrative scales. In addition, the VFD prescribes participatory approaches, structures for adequate water pricing to ensure sustainable water use, and a combined approach to target both point and diffuse sources of pollution. Next. When setting the environmental objectives, there are 2 main exemptions that the member states can use. First, there is a possibility to use extended deadlines until 2021 or at the latest 2027, provided that no further deterioration occurs and all of the conditions of VFD Article 4.4 are met. For example, this entails that the delay is due to reasons of technical feasibility or disproportional costs. Second, member states may aim to achieve less stringent environmental objectives for specific bodies of water when they are so affected by human activity or their national condition is such that the achievement of the standard objectives would be infeasible or disproportionately expensive. Next. So once the environmental objectives are set, the only way to allow for projects that risk deterioration of the water status or otherwise jeopardizes the achievement of the environmental objectives is by using the derogation regime of Article 4.7. So the derogation regime is applicable in 2 specific situations. First, it's possible to allow for new modifications to the physical characteristics of a surface water body or alterations to the level of groundwater bodies. Second, failure to prevent deterioration from high status water to good status water of a body of surface water, and this is a result of a new sustainable human development activity. So these are the 2 situations, and in both these situations also the following conditions must be met. A, all practical steps are taken to mitigate the adverse impact on the status of the body of water. B, the reasons must be explained in the river basin management plan for the district. C, the project must be of overriding public interest and or its benefits must outweigh the benefits of achieving the environmental objectives. And D, the beneficial objectives cannot, for reasons of technical feasibility or disproportionate cost, be achieved by other means, which are a significantly better environmental option. So this means that in situations of adverse effect or adverse effects that might not be mitigated as an integral part of a specific project, the only way to still allow the project is by motivating it under this regime. So either of the 2 situations just described must be applicable. Next, please. So the case law developed by the European Court of Justice over the years has clarified the legal obligations under the directive, and the high environmental ambitions has caused problems in implementation for several member states. In a number of decisions in the environmental field, the Court of Justice has established as a general principle when interpreting environmental directives that the individual provisions of an environmental framework directive, such as the VFD, cannot be properly understood in isolation. Rather, directive provisions must be interpreted within the context of the directive as a whole, including its purpose and more general objectives. Next. So the groundbreaking case in this regard was the Weser case from 2015. And basically what the Court of Justice established in this case was first that all environmental objectives of the Water Framework Directive are legally binding in each state of implementation of the directive, and this includes individual authorization procedures. Secondly, this means that EU member states are obliged to refuse authorization for individual projects that negatively affects the water environment unless the individual project can be motivated under the derogation regime just described. So following the later Schwarze-Sulm case from 2016, member states are allowed a certain degree of national discretion in the assessment of derogation, as long as all of the conditions of the derogation regime are met and they must be well documented in the grounds for reasoning of the decision. Regardless of this possibility to use the derogation regime, this quite strict interpretation of the environmental objectives and the obligations under the VFD has challenged member states' implementation in many countries, including Sweden. Next. So, where are we now? Well, the question of whether the directive should be revised has been debated ever since 2017, when it was first initiated. I think the first conference on the matter was held in 2018. However, on the 23rd of June 2020, the European Commission announced that the Water Framework Directive and its daughters will not be revised. So the directive stands. Rather, the Commission announced that more focus must now be placed on future implementation support for the member states and control in some ways. So this means that more infringement procedures initiated by the EU Commission probably are to be expected in the near future. And it is thus important that EU member states steps up and places even more focus on implementation during the upcoming water management cycle. The next cycle starts on December 2021 and runs until the end of 2027. It's important to emphasize that the directive will live on also after that, with new 6-year management cycles to come after 2027. The only thing that disappears after 2027 is the possibility to use the exemption of extended deadlines for when the environmental objectives are to be met. So before the next water management cycle starts, there is a public hearing planned here in Sweden for the period of November 1st, 2020 and leaps until 30th of April 2021. So in this public hearing, anyone is welcome to leave written comments on the new proposals for environmental objectives, program of measures, and river basin management plan. And that's all for today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Johanna. Thank you very much for a thorough presentation on the Water Framework Directive. I know you work for the Water District Authority, but do you think that the decision from June was it a good decision that not to revise the framework directive?
I don't want to value whether or not it was a good decision or not, but I think that we need to focus on what's ahead of us, and we need to implement this directive. And we've learned from each cycle, and we also encountered new struggles and problems, of course. But I think it's important that we all got sort of an answer at least, and the final decision to end the debate. And now we need to focus on what's next, so to speak.
Yeah, we surely need to do that. Look forward. Thank you, Johanna. And I understand you have to leave us now. Is that still so?
Yes, unfortunately, I don't have time to participate in the panel discussion afterwards.
Okay, yeah, I understand you were double booked. So thank you very much for joining us, being able to join us this afternoon. So we're glad you could make it. So, but if you do, the viewers, if you have any thoughts you want to share on Johanna's presentation, please let us know. And as I've been mentioning this morning, you use the Menti platform, menti.com, and write the numbers 6839136. So 6839136, and you will come into the Svemin Environmental Conference part of the Menti platform. It is important to have rules and regulation that solve real problems that actually could be sometimes missing today. I mean, sometimes the environmental quality standards, the EQS, are thought to be too strict for no reason at all. The important question is, what is really causing a negative effect? The consultants at Pelagia Nature and Environment have studied this relevant topic, and we are happy to have with us today, despite different shoulder-related accidents in the near time, Björn Rydvall. He will tell us more.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. Does make sense? Yes, as Emma said, my name is Björn Rydvall. I'm working at Pelagia since 2006, and actually working most of my time with different topics related to my Swedish mining industry, and especially questions regarding water. So this is the scope of my presentation. I'm gonna give a picture of which biological parameters are we monitoring today, and what possible effect or potential effects are those responding to, or are we evaluating today, and at the end show you our ideas on how this maybe could be a little bit more optimized to make it more relevant. And so this is what we're looking at. We have this is of course very general, but we have the surplus water from Swedish mining activities. I think we can say on all sites we have increased levels of nitrogen in different types coming from the explosives. Compared to the recipient or the natural water, the levels of sulfate and chloride are often much higher, and there are metals in higher levels than natural, and this is very site specific. It differs from one site to another depending on the mining activity, what kind of ore are we mining and what we're doing with it. And it's not only metals that are site specific, also other elements, other salts and the major elements could be present in higher levels. And I think for all these sites, there's a ambitious system for monitoring, taking water samples, looking at the levels of different substances in the water. And I mean, shouldn't this be enough then? But what we've seen, this is no news for anyone, I think, and that's a big part of the framework we're working with, is that no, water samples won't give you the full picture. First, looking at water samples, we will only get a response or an answer for what we're looking for. There might be other substances present that we either we don't know of or we have chosen not to analyze. And even for the substances that are analyzed, we don't know everything about the potential toxic effects. And looking at the water sample, you will get a snapshot. You won't get the integrated picture of this sampling point or the environment. You will know what was there at the point where I took my sample. Looking at toxicity, this is very complicated. I don't know far from everything about this, and I won't be able to cover only a small part of it. But we know that when you combine two substances that are toxic together, they might be more toxic, much more toxic in some cases. But on the other hand, we know that for other combinations, for example, when you have higher level of sulfates together with some metals, at least for some of the organisms, we see that they are much less toxic than what you could expect just looking at the metal content. And this toxicity is also affected by environmental factors, temperature, pH, organic matter, and many other factors. And when we discuss toxicity, it's not that we can look at the plant and from the toxic response on the plants or an algae, we know everything about how this mixture of water will affect the fish. And we can't look at the benthic fauna living on the bottom of a lake and predict what's going to happen with the diatoms. So I mean, the toxicity is specific for this organism group. It's not for each organism, but for the group of organisms that they are representing. And so together, this is pretty complex, and it's hard to make the right estimate. It's easy to overestimate toxicity, but in some cases you can underestimate it as well. So what we've written in the report for Svemin and many others have written before us is that if you want to look at effects on biological life in a water body, you should look at the response on biology. You cannot rely on chemistry. What we did, I mean, we've been going through 13 monitoring programs for ongoing mining activities in Sweden, and this is a large part of Swedish mining. And this is done today to quite large extent. I mean, going through these monitoring programs, we see that there is lots of energy and money spent on investigating benthic fauna in the streams, in lakes, electrofishing in the streams, extensive gill net fishing in lakes, looking at diatoms, phytoplankton, macrophytes, which is like the large plants, and also specific surveys on mouth parts on chironomids in some cases, metal levels in fish. So there is quite much work done today. And we would dig a bit deeper into this. We see that, and this is in general, there are several exceptions for this, but in general, a large is done every 4 to 6 years, and this survey is based on these regulations from the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, and supporting with lots of information that corresponds to the Framework Directive. And we have a pretty good picture on potential effects from eutrophication and acidification, because that's what you're looking for in these regulations. But unfortunately, we don't have that much information corresponding to eventual effects from metals or from the sulfates or something like that, because most of the work that is done today is based on the regulations, and the regulations are focusing on eutrophication, which is in Sweden overall is probably a good idea. When it comes to investigating mining in the northern part of Sweden, it is maybe not perfect. And what's also important to remember is that if you go back to the last picture, we see that the frequency of these investigations is in general 4 to 6 years. And for some of these methods, some of these parameters, for example, for phytoplanktons, this is not enough to meet the requirements in the regulations. So actually, we don't have enough to say anything. The year-to-year variation for phytoplankton is known to be at such an extent that you have to be at least every other year to be able to evaluate it. And only in a few cases we have that. So in the end, I'm going to summarize this with a couple of suggestions for improvements. First of all, if we're going to sample based on the regulations from the government, we need to adapt the sampling frequencies to each organism group. It's not as it's done today in many cases where you have the same frequency for plankton as for extensive gill net fishing. That's not effective and it's not wise. We think that we should have different frequencies for different types of organisms so that we, in an efficient way, get the data we need to evaluate it without causing too much effects on the environment. I mean, gill net fishing affects the fish population and it costs lots of money, but plankton sampling has to be done very more often. Otherwise, we can't evaluate the results. And also the fact that all these surveys that has been collected by today and probably going to carry on in the future, enormous amounts of information on the organism populations, lists of organisms found in these samples. And today they are evaluated directly corresponding to known information regarding their the effects from eutrophication and acidification, if they're sensitive or not to high and low pH, or if they're sensitive or not to level of nutrients or low oxygen levels, for example. But all this information could be used in a standardized way to look at potential effects or known effects from toxic substances, from metals. And to some extent that is already done today, but not in a standardized way that you can use as an index. We see a big potential in creating indexes for these different organism groups, responding to, is there a problem from example exposure to metals? We think that should be possible to make in a standardized way, since all the data is already there. Some of these monitoring programs already have evaluations on sublethal effects. I mean, deformations, for example, on diatoms or chironomides. That could be used more, and that gives us information about chronic effects or sublethal effects, which means that you will see an effect earlier than just an organism not being present. And another type of evaluations that is used at some extent today, but could be used much more, is looking at the actual content of metals in the biota. We know that the bioavailability of, for example, heavy metals is strongly affected of other parameters in the water, which means that instead of just discussing the level of metals, we could look at how much is actually taken into the organisms. And this will work good for metals, heavy metals that are not supposed to be in biological life. It's more complicated when it comes to those essential metals that we are auto-regulating within the body. On the other hand, the problem with these metals are normally much smaller. But when it comes to heavy metals that we are worried about, we could look at if they are actually biomagnified in the ecosystem, which means that are they available, like uranium. We know there's uranium, but is it a problem? That's hard to see from the water chemistry, but we could actually look at the biota and see if it ends up in the food web. Thank you.
Thank you, Björn, and thank you for being able to join us here. I think that what you said, one of your final sentences there, like if we trace or find one element in the water sample, yes, but is it a problem that it's there? I think that's a very relevant question. And I don't know if you heard the previous speaker, Johanna Söderasp from the Water District Authority. I asked her whether she has an opinion on whether the Water Framework Directive should have been revised or not. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a very complicated and maybe infected question.
That's why she couldn't answer. So I'm posing it to you instead.
We have we could use information that we have today to get more information on the actual effects. I think we are looking at. We don't have any sharp weapons today. Trying if we want to answer whether a mining activity is causing a problem or not. I think that could be done more precise.
Okay, all right. I say enough for now. For you, Björn, you're coming back for the panel discussion. We can.
Yes.
And again, if you have any questions for Björn or want to comment on what he has presented, please let us know through the Menti platform that we use for this conference. Svemin is running a large project focusing on water management. And we are trying to identify what changes are needed to achieve an efficient water management in Sweden. And we've been doing this for a while. And two colleagues from LKAB and Boliden, who has been with this project for a long time, is Lotta Olausson, LKAB, and Malin Soop from Boliden. They will give us a glimpse on what we have achieved or what we have done so far. So please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Emma. I will start to share the screen and hopefully you can see my presentation. There. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is, as Emma said, Malin Soop, and I'm part of the environmental staff function at Boliden. And I, together with Lotta Olausson from LKAB, have got the opportunity to give you a short presentation regarding what we're doing within Svemin's working group for water issues. And basically, we have been focusing a lot on the Swedish water regulation lately. And when I say the regulation, I mean both the actual legislation and the application and use of the legislation. And we have started from the situation where we are today and try to move forward to potential for improvements. And why is this such an important question for the mining industry? Well, since the implementation of the Water Framework Directive in Sweden, issues regarding water has become more and more complex, and now we consider it one of the most critical aspects for the mining industry in terms of, for example, developing our operations, starting new mines, and even continuing operating our existing mines. We have a regulation including boundaries that are set theoretically, that has evolved and become absolute limits in nature. And this has been done without enough consideration taken to different conditions in water bodies, as Björn was talking about, and the possibilities to mitigate or handle emissions to reach the limits, natural conditions, etc. So this has led to a situation where we find ourselves in more and more complex discussions. For example, in permitting processes that might in the end lead to sub-optimations of our operations and processes, and where the environmental gain or relevancy can be discussed. And I'd like to add that what we want in the end is not permissions without terms or limits to relate to, but we feel that this must be set in a relevant way, and the system must allow for improvements and development. So we started this project and we call it Swedish Water Regulation, Potential for Improvements. And the purpose is basically to create a platform that can function as a base for a proactive work with issues regarding the Swedish Water Regulation. We want it to be possible to discuss and cooperate between industry, authorities, and decision makers in a pragmatic way, since we believe that this is absolutely necessary to move forward. And we also are convinced that we share this experience with many others, maybe from different perspectives, but we have a lot to gain by discussing this and cooperate. So we have set up some targets. We want to illustrate through examples and experiences the problems that we have identified within Svemin. And we want to have a focus on potential for improvements. So we want to be solution oriented. And we also want to develop a plan to initiate necessary activities. And at the moment, we have partially reached some of these targets, but there are still more work to be done. So far, we have analyzed the current situation through a number of workshops, discussions, meetings, gathering of information, trying to actually point out where the most important areas are regarding the Swedish water regulation. And it's easier said than done, but we have tried to do it from different perspectives, from the water management cycle point of view, from a permitting process point of view, etc. And we had tried to compile all this information in a report. And in the report, every identified area, that could be from how the water bodies are pointed out to the possibility to get suspension from the legislation. We have tried to sort this information in different parts. So we point out which authorities that are involved in the process. We try to, of course, describe the problem. Where does it occur? Why does it occur? And we give examples of cases from different mines, because we know that actual examples from real life are a good way to start a discussion from. We have looked into laws, regulations, and guidance documents, and to see what is said there. And we also want to do comparison for some of these areas to other EU countries. How have they solved the situation? Here we still have some work to be done. And then we come to possible improvements. And I really want to emphasize that we haven't got all the answer, but we try to point in directions that we believe in. And Lotta will further on give you some examples from the report. And finally, we also try to point out if there are any ongoing projects, initiatives, investigations, etc., that handles this particular area as a way to possibly move further with the discussion. And you can see the report here. And I'd just like to say that at the moment, this is an internal document where more examples are to be added. And we also see this as something that we will continuously review, put in more and more examples and information. So we have a good platform to discuss from. But since one important target is to spread this information and share the information, we are at the moment looking into how we, in a best way, can distribute this information to others as well. And shortly, the conclusion. Well, there are difficulties communicating the problems coupled to water regulation. If you want a simple answer, we really tried to do it, but the water regulation consists of many, many individual parts that together creates the problem. So we like to illustrate it through a network that is getting more and more impenetrable to find the way through. And we believe that within the existing system, there are possibilities to both simplify and complicate. And to a large extent, this depends on how the legislation is actually used and how individual administrators handle different parts of the system. So there is a lack of this holistic approach that we are aiming for. And we believe that holistic perspective is absolutely necessary to make the best decisions in the end. So with that said, I will leave the word to Lotta, who's going to give you some practical examples.
Yes, thank you so much, Malin. So I will continue with the sharing 3 examples from the report, and this is examples that we have found out to be maybe leading us the road ahead in Swedish water management. So the first example is a more transparent way of establishing new RBSPs, and this is SFA in Swedish. So we would like to see this process in a four-step process, starting with a proper investigation about the up-and-coming RBSPs, and we want this investigation to be organized in a clear process with a linked time plan. This is because we want to contribute to a process like this. And we also believe that the mining industry has really good knowledge that could contribute to the investigation. The second step is an evaluation step, where we motivate why is it necessary for this specific substance to be an RBSP, and what is the expected environmental effect if we have this new regulation. When we have continued and we have found out, okay, there is a need for this new RBSP, then we really want to emphasize the impact assessment, which should actually cover what are the consequences for this suggestion. And also in this case, we really would like to have a time plan to make sure that all concerned parties have a chance to give in their comments to the investigation. And we would also like this impact assessment to be made from a broad social economic perspective and not only from an environmental perspective. It should also be possible to reach what we are proposing. So at the very end, when we have finally determined the need for RBSP, then of course it's time for a decision. And what we really would like to see in the decision of an RBSP is what we call a dossier. And that is some kind of documentation of this whole process, so that it is possible to go back, re-evaluate, maybe new information has become available, maybe we need to reassess something further on. So our next example, it has actually to do with what I just talked about, the improved impact assessment. And this it's not only for RBSPs, of course, but it has to do with all kinds of water legislations. We think it's really important to have an early consultation with all the industries that are actually involved that's going to be affected about this change. And this is because we think we as industries actually can provide lots of knowledge, so that people who are making the new legislation or the proposal can collect a lot of knowledge from us. And as you can see in these pictures, this is pictures from pilot tryouts for different remediation techniques here in Kiruna. We also believe that extended competence is necessary in this impact assessment. That means we are actually, I want to go back to what Malin said about this holistic approach. So we really need to see this from a society point of view and not only from an environmental point of view. So it should be possible for both having industries and have a good environmental law in place at the same time. Yes, I think our time is almost up. But the third example is that we really would like to have change a little bit in the definition of RBSP to allow a site-specific approach. Today they are set on a national value that is the same everywhere in Sweden. But since mining recipients are quite different from a typical normal surface water in Sweden, it would be much more. It would be much better, and actually, it would make a lot more sense if we could have this site-specific approach. And this is also going back to what Björn talked about before. So what we in Svemin and in the working group for water really would like to do in the future is to have a more cooperation with HAV, that is the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, in research and different projects for a better of these site-specific RBSPs in the future. So that was our last example. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lotta, and thank you, Malin, for a presentation here in this of this complicated matter that water management really is. I think one of you guys said that it is a network of problems. It was you, Malin, who said it is a network of problems that sort of are interlinked and intertwined. I think that it could also describe the state of the world of today. You know, it's a network of problems out there. Thank you very much, and you will come back for the panel discussion at the end of this session. Before moving on to the next speaker, I believe we have a Menti question, because we would like to find out and get to know a little bit more about our viewers, your participators. So, what do you think of when you think of water? We already have a few words in this word cloud. Is it up and running, Linus?
It's up and running, yes.
So that's what you guys think of when you think of life. I think that's wise. Essential, thirst, clean. I sort of estimated it would be more like problems. Tricky, complicated. I'm happy to see all these positive words.
Life is standing strong. Life and essential.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have had enough. Like we have mentioned, water management is not easy. There is a lot to be coordinated in this matter. Therefore, we are very happy to have with us today from the Ministry of Enterprise, the Special Coordinator, the Director General Ulla Sandborg.
Well, thank you, Emma. I'm going to share my pictures here. And also thank you for the invitation. Yes, my name is Ulla Sandborg. I work for the Ministry of Enterprise and Innovation, and I'm coordinating the industry in the sustainable use of water. My background is in IT telecom, but mainly in energy. And there are very many similarities between energy and water. Old infrastructure and often taken for granted. So I'm going to talk a bit more about that. I'm going to talk about my role and my assignment, but also some key findings that I have. I started to work as the coordinator by the beginning of this year. What is the coordinator's role, and why do we have coordinators? It's when the government and the ministry want to push a question, and then this time it's the water area, they want to investigate more. So I push the development within this area. I investigate challenges, and I can say there are many suggestions that are given to the ministries, and I think it's very hard for them to prioritize what's coming and how to handle all these issues that are coming. So I investigate that, and then I suggest development within areas that is needed. I work together with the authorities, but I'm more independent. I can actually suggest whatever I want, but I'm not the one to decide in the end. My work is not a regular investigation with one report. I report on an ongoing basis. I think that's a much faster way to move forward. And I like the way you're working, more agile, so that's good. How about the why, the background? As you all know, water is used for so many purposes, and it is essential for functioning society and enterprise. A sustainable use of water needs to be in balance with the amount of water that we have. And for this, we need a very good data. We also need reliable prognosis, both of available resources, but also of the consumption. So for this, we need more measurements and digitalization. That's what some of the authorities are working with. We also have the climate change to handle for the future. The summer of 2018 was one year that was extra challenging in some areas in Sweden. Warm weather and drought led to stress on the water supply. And I think that some people actually awakened by this and saw that water is not an unlimited resource anymore. And how about the what? The assignment, what am I doing then? I drive the development for responsible usage of water, and the question I often ask myself is if there are enough incentives to be responsible and sustainable in using water. The main drivers I've found is very interesting. It's when you have the shortage of water, then you start to work much more with the issues. And then there are the customers. They are driving sustainable use of water. They want to have sustainable products. So I think that's very good. That's a good driver. I coordinate a huge amount of actors in agriculture, food, enterprise, lots of networking. And I support ongoing initiatives, both at the authorities, but elsewhere as well. So it's a lot of gathering of information. I have drawn a picture of areas and challenges, and I work together with my colleagues at the ministry with this. How do I do this then? Way of working. Of course, the dialogue to promote the exchange of experiences and cooperation is the most important thing that I do. One area that I'm working in is at the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences. After a strategic work, they decided to have a program for sustainable use of water. I think it's very good because you then gather research companies, authorities, trade associations, and companies together with academia. So we are launching a report in the beginning of next year. I can also see that lots of the research companies have an increased focus on water. The issue is very important for lots of companies and the society, of course. And I analyze conditions to develop more efficient processes when we're using water and the impact on Swedish competitiveness. I think this is very important. We often talk about the environmental and the climate, but we also have to be competitive in the society as a whole. And the goal is, of course, to identify areas that need development. And I like to work with the trade associations. Like Svemin's report is very good. Then it's very I can handle these issues and talk to others about your views. So I thank you for that report. Last of all, some key findings for me. I promised you to get some of those. Five of those. We've heard Malin and Lotta and more people talking about the holistic view. It's really needed, for instance, for permits. If we're going to achieve the goals both for the climate and for the environment, we need a holistic view, but we also need it in a bigger sense as well. A system-wide perspective is what we really need. The second thing is that we need a transparent and predictable processes for new and renewed permits. This is crucial for all companies in all countries. I talked about the availability of data, or measurement and digitalization, and an issue is the secure sharing of data, because today it's strict legislation in this area, but we need to get some tools to share data, because knowing is important when we talk about water, not just thinking and guessing. The organization to manage water nationally is important, and an investigation was done, and the suggestion is presented, and also viewpoints are gathered, and we're waiting for the next step. In Sweden, there are the water area is divided between at least 5 ministries, and I think this is hard for the industry to handle it, actually. There's also an investigation. It's launched in August by the government. It's called a modern and efficient environmental assessment. And of course, we're looking forward to see what this can give this a push in this area. It's going to be ready by the end of next year. The last thing I wanted to say is the significance of coordination between the industry and the municipality. This is a success factor, to have a common understanding of the challenges. This is also needed between the authorities. So I push for a common understanding and support from the authorities in order to manage all the challenges that we have with the Water Framework Directive, and also getting new companies and new mines and whatever in our country. So that's what I wanted to end with. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulla. Thank you very much. Thank you for being able to join us and talk about your assignment. It is an important assignment, as you say. It's complicated matters, and everything that you come to the conclusion that you need a holistic point of view. It's that is complicated. You know, many parameters interlinked. But having these insight now after you started your assignment in January, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you have met most of the stakeholders, or most of the essential or major players or stakeholders at this point. How willing are they to cooperate?
I say they are very willing to cooperate because they can see a way forward. And I mean, we have a challenge with implementing the Water Framework Directive, for instance. And I think that lots of the companies and the trade organizations see a possibility to move forward now. So I think every phone call I make makes a new meeting. So I've never ever been stopped from talking to anyone. And the most important thing I do is put together authorities with the companies to try and understand the perspectives. I think that's a very important part of my role.
Mm. So I guess that is another way of expressing you're still an optimist to create, to leave a better situation than you walked into, sort of.
Absolutely, yes.
Mm. Thank you. So I think we head into we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but that will mean that we have more time for the panel discussion. So I'd like to invite all speakers back to this closing panel discussion. And could I please have, thank you, all speakers now here on the screen in the studio. So we have two new faces. We have Sofie Karler. She's a senior environmental advisor at Järnkontoret, the steel industry association. And we have Viktor Falkenström. You are a lawyer and a specialist in environmental law at Hamilton Law Firm. And what you don't know about water management is not worth knowing, right? So, Viktor, I'll start with you. What would you say is the most crucial change that needs to be done to today's rules and regulations from your point of view? And explain it like to a 3-year-old. Oh, we have something's wrong there with your sound. Is that here or is it in Karlstad? Karlstad, have you, could you please unmute if you're muted? Sounds like water to me. Okay, let's move into someone else. Sophie, I'll move into you and you try to, I mean, if you unplug your headphones or whatever.
Yes, I'm unmuted.
Oh yeah, so Sophie, your voice sounds loud and clear anyway. So I move on to you. What is the most crucial change you see that needs to be done at this point to create a more efficient water management in Sweden?
I think it's, well, the question is not easy, huh? And we have heard a lot of puzzle pieces, bits and pieces, very intelligent ones from previous speakers. So I'm not going to go through that again. But what comes to mind is everybody talks about being more holistic. And actually, if we put all the pieces together, we will get more holistic. But if we go back to the Water Framework Directive, we have a very intricate and complex directive that is made out of legislation and science, natural science, I would say. And it has 20 years. It's 20 years old. So, of course, we would have liked it to be revised or modernized, but given the conditions today, we have to work with what we have. But what I would say, going back to the holistic view, is that we need to put in more social aspects, societal aspects as well. So going back to legislation and natural science, I would say put in more social science and try to make it better. It's just I would like to put that into the frame because it hasn't been mentioned. And part of that is, of course, the governance model. We haven't talked so much about that. But we have been digging into and analyzing good environmental or water management models in Sweden, but nothing has become concrete. So there's a lot to be done there.
That's true. Victor, do we have Karlstad connected now? No, we don't. We just skip that for a while. And another question, maybe to Malin and Lotta from the mining companies. Why do you think water management issues have been this powerful in the permitting processes? Why has it come this far?
Well, I can start, and maybe Malin can continue. But I think it is because of you have these really clear boundaries. So it's really easy to see: do you meet them or do you not meet them? And that is easy on the surface, so to say. But it is really hard when you try to scratch on that surface, and things are not as easy as those clear boundaries seems to be. But that is why I think it's such a big question in permitting processes, because it is really easy to find some concrete rule or level of a substance in the water that you can really look into.
Malin, do you agree?
Yeah, and I agree totally.
It's measurable. Is that the reason?
Yeah, I think so. It's something to put your hands on and relate to. So that is part of it, I think.
I can understand Victor is with us now.
Yeah, I'm here. Do you hear me better now?
Yeah, loud and clear here in Stockholm. So I repeat my questions. My initial question: what, from your point of view, following this question, this issue closely for many years, what is the most crucial change that needs to be done with today's rules and regulation?
I think the previous speakers are pointing in the right direction. We are talking about proceedings in courts where we are always discussing levels of pollutants, levels of environmental quality standards, and it's not entirely giving the true situation. I think Björn Rydvall explained very eloquent that when we're talking about the court always will side with something that they can relate to, and if someone is presenting a certain number, that gives them something to go with, and unfortunately things are more complicated than that.
Yeah, surely it sure is. But how would you create such a system without going into too much details that do not rely on numbers and figures or levels?
I think the presentation that mentioned this dossier solution is heading in the right direction. To give a true understanding of the water and how its properties, you have to see to the matter that there are in some instances there are mines and they have been there for a really long time. You have to give these companies something to some input to the matter, so that EQS are fair, to speak.
I'd like to go on. Do we have any questions from the audience, Linus?
Yes, we do. We have one question here directed to Björn, and it goes like this. The difficulty in investigating the transport of elements in food webs requires a stronger collaboration between science and industry. Suggestions on how to make that happen?
That's absolutely true, for sure. But I mean, as soon as you allow that kind of information to be evaluated, I mean, as Victor said in the court, I think it will be we will gather that information. I mean, but as it is today, if that kind of information aren't really used, or it doesn't get the importance in the court, I don't think. I mean, then we won't get it put together. But as long as if the industry knows that they can use it, they will make sure that it's gathered together with science. I mean, I don't know if that's a good answer, but I mean, if we start investigating it, we will learn.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you.
What do you other guys say about that? Do you agree with Björn? Or do you want to add something? I go back once again to LKB Boliden.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. We see that we really need other ways of measuring or looking into how we affect the water systems. So this might be a good way, and I agree. If we can just come up with a plan to do it, then I mean, that is something that everybody should be interested in.
Molly, what do you say?
Well, just to add on what Lotta said, I mean, we are already working with this, so this is on our agenda for our focus during the next year will be on biological follow-up in the waters that are affected by our activities. So of course, in the context of that, we will have to look into what changes do we have to do, and in what way do we do that in the best way, so to say.
Thank you. I have another question for Ulla. What would you say is the state of Swedish waters of today? How is the water doing?
We have definitely much more to do, we've done a lot. And when we started the work many years ago, like 20 years ago, I think we thought that we had much better quality of the water. But we have now realized that we have much more to do, actually. So I think the status is, we can do a lot more.
Because some say the water quality is actually better today, but you say it's the opposite.
No, I say that it differs over the country. So in some senses it's better, in some it's worse. But I think that we thought that it was much better.
But the water quality...
We have worked with the issues.
Go ahead, please continue.
Because we have worked with the issues for several years. So I think we thought that we have handled, for instance, from the agriculture area, the pollutions. But I think it's a lot more to do.
I mean, as you say, even though it's the water quality is many places good, but it varies from site to site. Is water quality in a threatening environmental problem, would you say?
In some senses, in some areas, it is. But I think we have good work at the municipalities to gather this information. But I mean, things are always happening at new factories or old factories. Things get old. We have an old infrastructure, as I said from the beginning, and things can break actually. So we should always be working with the issues. It's important.
Okay. What do you want to? I was also Sophie, for example. What is from your working with iron, the steel industry? What would you like to add to this discussion? Having a slightly different, coming from another angle into this issue.
Yes, thank you. I think what strikes me listening to this session is that, I mean, where all the activity sectors we are, including the steel production, we see about the same problems and we face the same problems. So, for example, I mean, the industrial plants that are part of our federation, SSAB, Sandvik, Ovako, Outokumpu, both stainless steel and the larger ones, they are seeing all these permit problems that, for example, permitting procedures that are very lengthy and complicated. But so that doesn't differ. What is at risk right now, I would say, is that because we have a Water Framework Directive that looks the way it does today, it's difficult to predict how we will be able to really do this sustainable development. I mean, develop climate neutral, have climate neutral investments. And of course, you all heard about the hybrid development project where with SSAB together with LKAB and Vattenfall are doing huge investments right now for fossil-free steel production. And there are many projects within that that needs permitting. And so we still don't know here how this will be affected, or we hope not too hindered by the Water Framework Directive right now, because as Johanna was saying before, there are only two possibilities for derogation when you cannot absolutely secure the non-deterioration principle at the single quality factor level. And those two derogation possibilities, they are not, they don't apply to industry. So that's the tricky problem that we are all facing today. But on the positive side, I would like to stress that the Water Framework Directive is, I mean, what has been a hugely innovative piece of legislation, which has done tremendous progress throughout all the European waters. And for example, in Sweden, we have a unique recipient control program that I think we wouldn't have without the Water Framework Directive. So
good things with the Water Framework Directive too. Yeah. Victor, do you agree with Sophie on her points?
Yeah, I think so. And what EU basically said, that when they said that we won't amend the Water Framework Directive, is that now the member states have the power. It's up to them to implement this in the right way. And we still have that power because this is a directive. And we as a country can amend the rules, and we can complement the rules and give the applicants of certain permits a better chance of getting to the place that we want them to be, because as mentioned earlier, there's no I don't think that the industry, whether you're talking about the steel or the mining industry, wants anything else than to be in accordance with the rules. But the problem is to show this to the court, to prove that we are in fact in line with the rules. That's the problem, not the will to do so.
Yeah, I agree. I understand we have a few more questions coming in. Linus.
Yes, we do. This one is for Sophie, Victor, and Ulla, and it's about the national versus the EU level. And it goes, what can be done on the national level? And how can that have an impact on the EU regarding water management? Ulla, for instance, or Victor.
I can start answering that question, and the others can fill in, because in Sweden we have what I think is called in English the Water Management Regulation, which is sort of the implementation of the Water Framework Directive. And as a regulation, it's certainly open to amendments, and it has been amended in certain ways. And we also have talked about the Swedish Maritime Authority, and they can amend their regulations in certain ways without threatening to be in conflict with the Water Framework Directive. It's my opinion that we could do more here. We could use the Water Framework Directive more to be a little bit more on the offense instead of on the defense.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Please continue.
Yes, and I fully agree. There are rooms for exemptions, but I think that the authorities need some guidance regarding this, and we also need to have some good examples to show that it's possible. We are not there yet, but I think it's needed, both the examples, but also the courage from the authorities.
All right, thank you.
I agree too, and I think there's also a side to this that maybe not everybody knows, but I mean the Commission itself, the European Commission, has their own sort of management system for water, where they have working groups, expert groups, and so on, and they have been working since 2000 with the Water Framework Directive, and there the member states come in, of course, and are part of this work, and in that framework, the common implementation strategy, Sweden has an important role to play, and I think they haven't really done that enough. I think, for example, thinking about Liselott and Malin in their project, that's where they should bring up the issue of the specific pollutants, and really frame it in the right way, in a more ecosystemic way. So there's a lot. There's a potential there to do much more.
All right, thank you. And also back to the previous question, as a bit of a clarification here. To clarify the question to Björn and the panel, what's the next step to close this gap between science and industry? Can you share your thoughts on that a little bit more, to close the gap between the science and the industry?
That's a very good question. I don't think maybe I'm not the right person I can definitely not get a complete answer to that. But I mean, following up to what Malin said, I mean, there is lots of investigations performed already, which from my perspective, I think they are related to permit situations. But what we think that is that maybe some of those very extensive investigations that are performed prior to this permit process, if some of that were performed more regularly and in the standardized way, maybe instead of some of the other investigations that are done today, which doesn't really maybe fully relevant to the mining, maybe lots of information would be present already before when they start the next permit process, and then you could compare it with other mining sites, and I mean together we will get lots of information. I think lots of this is already present, but it needs to be collected and evaluated in the standardized way, and I mean that should probably not be done by consultants. That should be a couple of PhD studies probably. I mean, I think if the mining companies thought that this could be used to a high extent in the permit process, then I think there's lots of initiatives that will start quite quickly. And I think that then there you have a connection to the university. The data is already collected, but someone needs to put it together.
All right, thank you. Anyone else wants to talk about.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll just compliment Björn, saying that there has been, during all these years since the Water Framework Directive started, there has been a number of investigations at the EU level, where, for example, the metal and mining industry, since we are in this framework here, have put in lots and lots of millions to really investigate the effects of metals in environment. And so I think the science is there in a way. I think that's also what Björn said. I think what is important here is the level of trust and sort of going beyond borders. And somebody spoke about transformative changes in the morning. Well, this is about transformative changes. We really need to start working much more across the borders here between industry and authorities and science and policy and so on. This is the time.
Yes, and I can also add what I already talked about, or we already talked about. This is exactly what we want. We are planning to do more work in this area, and we want to do this in cooperation with others, with authorities as well, so we can move forward, so we can agree on that we are on the right track, and that we actually can use this knowledge in permitting processes, for example. So we are really, that's our goal and our aim at the moment from our side.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Emma?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have some final words? Do you want to add something? Otherwise, we will wrap this last session of today up. Okay. Thank you, speakers. Thank you, all participants and viewers, for tuning in today and for your contributing to this vivid environmental conference despite this digital format. It's been, like we have been repeating, it's our very first digital conference, so we hope you enjoyed it. Or if you see any chances of us improving in any ways, because we are continuing tomorrow, don't hesitate, just let us know. Write us an email and tell us what we need to, how we could improve. Anyway, now we are closing this first day of the Svemin Environmental Conference. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, we will be back. And use the second link to join us tomorrow. Or you can, there are different ways to finding the environmental conference tomorrow. So you can go to YouTube and you search for the Svemin YouTube channel and you will find the broadcast there. Or you can just go to the Svemin webpage, svemin.se, and you will find everything you need there. And you can just tune in at 9 o'clock. So at 9 o'clock we will have the fourth session of the environmental conference, and that's on tailings dams safety. Very interesting and very important. And at 11 o'clock we will have the last of our 5 sessions, and that's on traceability and certification. And we will be talking a lot about the Svemin project TraceMet. So thank you very much for today, and see you tomorrow morning. Bye bye.